All right, welcome everyone to another edition of Grid Down Live Q&A. So I hit the go live button here about a minute early, so we're going to give it a minute till some of the Patreon followers, some of the other people start to join. So hang tight. Hey, if you're just joining, good morning, Stacy. Thanks for joining. I kind of joined the live chat here just a hair early, so we're going to give it another minute or two, let some other people jump on. I hope everyone's having a good week. Got a lot of questions here to go through for Patreon. It's been a crazy couple months for me. I've been doing this for 12 years, grid down consulting and working with high net worth families around the country, getting them set up. And it has been the last 4 months, I'll say it, have been unbelievable. Like unlike anything I've seen. There's a lot of people that are really concerned about what's going on in the country right now, and justifiably so. We just saw the verdict come through here 2 days ago with Trump. Again, I'm not going to get into the political sphere of it, but there's a lot of people that are concerned about even social unrest and some of the things that could come from that, the cities and unease. So they're looking for locations to kind of fall back and take their family for a safe location. But I've never seen in the 12 years I've been doing this and the hundreds and hundreds of clients I've worked with, I've never seen the unbelievable amount of just people reaching out to me every week. Dozens of emails every week, everybody trying to get help. So I've been very busy lately. So with that said, looks like we got some people joined on now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Now, how this typically works on the live Q&As, if you don't know already, I'm your host, Jonathan Hollerman. I'm the Deputy Director of the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security. I'm a member of the Electromagnetic Defense Task Force. I'm the owner of Grid Down Consulting. I'm a #1 best-selling author in Survival and Preparedness, Survival Theory 1, Survival Theory 2. And today, basically, I'm going to be taking questions. There's a lot of questions I'm going to be answering from Patreon followers first. And then if you are online, feel free to type in a question over in the chat. And when I get done answering the questions from the Patreon followers, we'll go ahead and dig into the questions in the live chat. So with that said, probably one of the biggest things that people have been asking me is in regards to the recent solar flare that we just had. So there's a lot of confusions I'm talking about back in May 10th through May 12th. And to be honest with you, it was a pretty nerve-wracking couple days for me because I was actually on location in the panhandle of Texas with the client. I was supposed to be flying back. Can't remember if it was the 11th or the 12th, but it was the day where the major solar, the major CME was hitting. I was 3 hours from Dallas. I had a rental car. Luckily, I had a Jeep Liberty or a Jeep Trailhawk 4x4. So that was a plus. And I had it full of fuel. And, I had some amazing clients there that are willing to pass me a handgun and some jerry cans full of fuel to help me on my way. If things did shut down, I was going to be able to get home. I also, whenever I travel on, a question I regularly get is, are you concerned when you travel? And yes, there is some concern there of something bad happening when I'm halfway across the country or on the other side of the country. But anytime I travel with a fairly significant amount of cash, typically in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $8,000. As we've discussed previously in a long-term grid down event or any kind of major disaster, the first day that something happens. Cash talks. You can get a lot done with cash on day one through sometimes even day two. So I'm kind of relying on that as well. So with that said, it was a really nerve-wracking couple of days for me with the CME, and it was hitting. There was a lot of chatter online. There was a lot of information that was flying around. There was a lot of misinformation that was flying around. And so on the following day, I actually recorded, as I was driving back to the airport, I recorded a live video for Patreon. Patreon's a little screwy. They limit very short videos that you can upload to Patreon. So you have to go through YouTube and then upload it from YouTube to Patreon. So it's kind of a pain. But I did a live, just kind of telling everybody what's going on, my perspective, because everybody was reaching out and wanting to know what I thought. And if, is this the big one? Is this the end of the world? Unfortunately, I didn't discover till like a week later that video actually never even made it up to Patreon. So I apologize about that. I just assumed it said uploading. So I just went about, and obviously had a travel day. I got back to the office here. I probably had 75 emails waiting for me in the office. And it was probably a week later before I figured out that never got uploaded. So let's talk about solar flares and CME, since that's a big topic on the ground right now. So if you have the tracking apps from NOAA or NASA or one of the other apps where you can track CMEs and solar flares that come off the sun, what you're going to find is they're typically graded between G1 and G5, with G5 being the highest. Now, it's interesting to note G5, I don't know the technical level. A G5 is a really bad CME, and the May 10th through 12th is the first G5 that we've had in this solar cycle. And that could cause a lot of problems. And I was, like I said, I was nervous. I was out of state. I'm contacting Tommy Waller from the Center for Security Policy, guys back here from the task force. I'm trying to get information. Should I drive back into Dallas and hope I can get on this plane, or should I just take a left turn and drive back to West Virginia from Texas? So these were some of the things that were on my mind. And so, we're digging in, trying to figure out how bad it's going to be. So let's discuss that. So G5 being the worst, the problem is G5, it's like G1, G2, G3, G4, G5. G3 is when it starts interfering with things, and G5 is a really bad CME. But G5, there's no ceiling to G5. So you have like the G5 we just had, but 30,000 feet above that is a Carrington level. So they don't really have G6 through G20 essentially. So that's part of the problem with anytime we get looking like we may be getting hit with the G5, people start freaking out, justifiably so. So I'm talking to Tommy, and he's, very close with the guy that runs Imprimis, and they run equipment for the electric grid to kind of mitigate GICs and overcurrents on the lines. And it's a new technology, and this guy's telling Tommy there's stuff tripping all over the place, but so their product is very good. By the sounds of it, it was doing its job. I know there was some outages here or there, but as looking back, hindsight, nothing really happened. So the question is how do we know? Right? Like, we're seeing these notifications from NOAA, and they're telling us that there's a G5 that's going to be hitting in the next day or two. There's a lot of chatter online that's happening. How do we know whether we need to be getting ready to bug out or not? So my first recommendation is, if you see the notification that a G5 is about to hit, if your stuff's scattered all over the house and you're not prepared, you haven't done a dry run on bugging out, that's the first thing. Get your stuff squared away, get ready just in case. And there's a reason for that, which we'll get into here in a minute. So how this works. Okay. So just yesterday, I had the opportunity to have a nice long, about a 35-minute chat with Sean Dahl from the NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center. You've probably seen him on some interviews around that May 10th, 12th timeframe. He's the guy that goes out and, discusses with the media and everything. So I had the ability to kind of interview him as a representative deputy director at the EMP task force here. And it was a great learning experience. He answered some of my unanswered questions that I was, wasn't sure on. So if you don't know, the NOAA is the primary agency responsible for alerting the electric utilities. FEMA, and the government on large CMEs that erupt from the sun. They use a hotline. Basically, when a large detonation or a large eruption from the sun happens, they have a hotline that they pick up the phone from their Space Weather Prediction Center, and basically, as soon as they pick up that phone, it notifies all the electric utility reliability coordinators. It notifies the National Security Council. It notifies a bunch of FEMA and a bunch of other agencies, and everybody jumps on the call to find out what's up. And so basically, they give them well-informed, hey, we just had this large eruption from the sun. At that point in time, they don't really have any data. They don't have any models or predictions. They're just giving the utilities and everything a heads up, saying, hey, this is going to happen, in the next basically 12 hours on an extreme side to 2 days. A CME is going to hit Earth. Now, what happens is they jump into their computers. They start, taking all the pictures they have from the sun. They start running their models and their algorithms, and they start putting everything into their computer and their software. And it takes them anywhere between 6 and 12 hours to get that data put together. And then they pick up the hotline again. Once they get that data put together, they pick up the hotline and they give all that information to the electric utility, saying, hey, this is what we're predicting. This is kind of what we expect this to be on the G scale. There's a dozen other different factors, from the radio frequency and how it's going to affect GPS and satellites and airline radios. So all these organizations are on listening to this, getting advanced information on the predictions. That's the key. The predictions that NOAA is making. And that takes about 6 to 12 hours to put together. So what happens after that? At the end of the day, they don't know exactly how it's going to affect the electric grid. So when I was speaking with him, my primary discussion is on how does this affect the electric grid and the electric utilities. Okay. So with that information, NOAA does not have any test data. They don't have any tests to say how it's going to affect the grid. All they have is the data to give to the utilities. So the utilities are the one that are supposed to understand how to take the data that NOAA's given them and how to protect themselves. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of utility organizations, and they all have their own procedures. Okay, so this is important. They all have their own, how they're going to handle this for their specific locale, for their specific equipment. They have operating procedures on how they're going to respond to a large CME. So from there, just to kind of put it in perspective, there's two satellites that are really far away from Earth in the direction of the sun. One's called the Discover. That's NOAA's Discover satellite. And there's also NASA's ACE satellite. Now, when that CME that burst off the sun hits those two satellites transmit more data back to Earth. And essentially what that data tells them, it's going to give them the speed of the CME. It's going to give them the magnetic field strength, the polarity, the orientation. It's going to give them a lot more data points just before it hits Earth. So in most cases, that's 20 to 40 minutes. So NOAA gets this data 20 to 40 minutes before. And if it's a very fast or a very large solar flare or CME, like a Carrington event, it could reach Earth in as few as 10 minutes or even less. It depends on how fast it's moving. So we haven't seen one of those yet, but they predict that would be the case. So with that said, you're talking 20 or 25 minutes. Again, they pick up that hotline. They talk to all the electric utilities. They say, hey, this is what we're expecting. And this information is critical, like the polarity of it, right? The polarity of the CME. And, you take that in reference of what the current polarity of the Earth is. If they're the same polarity, that CME is going to hit Earth, and it's kind of like two magnets coming together. And it's going to mitigate the strength of how hard that CME hits Earth because the Earth's magnetic field is pushing against it. Now, if it's the opposite polarity as what the Earth current, where it's going to hit is currently at, it's going to have a full impact. So with that said, that information, they feed that to the utilities, they feed that to FEMA, National Security Council, and everybody's listening in, and they start taking measures accordingly. 20, 40 minutes is not a lot of time. And if it's a massive, like a Carrington level event, it's going to be closer to 10 minutes or possibly even less. A couple data points here when speaking to him. The Carrington event only took 18 hours to hit Earth. Remember when I said it usually takes anywhere between 2 and 4 days for a CME to hit Earth? The Carrington event hit Earth in 18 hours, and there's been some CMEs that have come off the Earth. That didn't, or that came off the sun that didn't hit Earth, that they anticipated that it would have even reached Earth quicker, as in within 12 to 15 hours. So a large solar flare can get to Earth very quick. Remember how I said it takes 6 to 12 hours just to do the modeling before it even reaches the satellite? So take that into consideration. A couple other points that's important to note here. So how this works is they measure NOAA, their data that they get back from the utilities after the fact or during the event. That's one area I wasn't clear. If they get real-time data back from this organization that has ground sensors all over the world, and it's tracking the rise in DC, which is what the CME is putting onto our electric grid is AC that you plug your equipment and everything in. Well, the problem with a CME with these magnified particles is it's DC current, and it's getting on all these long line transmission lines, and it's, these substations aren't designed to handle a big load of DC on top of the AC that they're running, the AC current that they're running. So as little as 1 volt per kilometer. Okay, that's how they track them, this worldwide organization, and they feed this information back to NOAA either during or after the fact. So NOAA can look at, and they're building their own algorithms, they're building their own software, their prediction equipment, and their prediction modeling. They're constantly growing that. They're doing great work. So they kind of look after the fact, okay, this is the CME that came off the Earth. This is how fast it reached us. This is the data we got from it, from the satellites. This is the data we got when it hit Earth. And now we're looking at the data that has to do with how it affects the electric grids. So as few as 1 volt per kilometer could start having negative impacts on the grid. And so he estimates the Quebec CME that hit in 1989. And if you never tracked that, it took down power for like 12 hours up in Quebec. If you look at a couple of the substations, there's some pictures you can find online where the copper windings on this big 400-ton behemoth are just melted together. It was pretty crazy how he estimates that the voltage per kilometer of that event was between 10 and 12 VPK. Now, when I asked him about the Carrington event, he said that was probably over 100, possibly hundreds of VPK that hit the Earth at that point in time. So this storm from May 10th to 11th was about 4 times less powerful than the Quebec storm. Okay, so again, I didn't get exact numbers from him. I don't know if they have them or not, but I'm just estimating. So let's just throw out there's maybe 1, 2, possibly 3 volts per kilometer that it got attached to the electric grid, essentially. And again, I'm talking in layman terms, trying to keep this simple. The Quebec CME that hit was 10 to 12, and a Carrington level would be 100 or higher. So the key here is that information doesn't come until not when it hits the satellites, but until the CME actually hits the Earth. Are they going to know how it's reacting with the Earth's crust and our magnetosphere and all this other stuff, and how it's coupling to the lines? They're not going to have that data till it's actually in play and happening. So what does this mean for us as preppers, as people who want to know things before they happen? Here's the point. You're not going to know until it hits Earth. They're going to have between a 10 and a 40-minute heads up. So let's ignore the G3, G4, and the low G5s. Let's just talk about big G5s, big Carrington level CMEs that hit Earth. They're only going to have 10 to 15 minutes heads up. once that CME hits those two satellites and they start getting that data information back, they got to run it through the computer real quick. They pick up the hotline. They let the electric utilities know. So this is one of the conversations we've been having at the task force. It's the conversations that have been happening going back to the EDTF back in 2019. I was a part of the Secure the Grid Coalition. Is that to minimize destruction on the power grid? Ideally, what you would want to have happen is to shut down the power grid to minimize the effect that a CME is going to have on the grid. I should say to minimize the amount of destruction it's going to have on the grid. So the problem is you got all these different agencies. They all have their own procedures. They all have their own equipment. They all have their own internal way of handling a CME. There is no overarching national planning for a very large Carrington level CME. Because one of the things I asked him is like, does the National Security Council on that call have the ability to basically tell the electric utilities, okay, we got 10 minutes here, figure it out, power down the national electric grid before this thing's hit? He said he strongly does not believe that's the case. Obviously, he doesn't know for sure, but he's never heard anything like that. And he said he highly, highly doubts, and this is the feelings of the task force and the Security Grid Coalition and a lot of these other organizations, that they're going to do it. Reasonings. The reasonings behind this are, number one, liability. The electric utilities, I mean, can you imagine if they just decided, hey, in 10 minutes, we're going to shut down the national electric grid? I mean, there would be deaths as a result of that. I mean, there's people that are on ventilators in hospitals. There's all kinds of major ramifications for just shutting down the grid unawares on everybody like that really fast, right? So just for liability reasons, they're probably not going to do it. The other thing is there's been a bunch of junk science papers from EPRI, and their industry papers that are put out on EMP and solar flare. There's one from 2019. There's one floating around the Pentagon from the Atomic Organization. And essentially their industry science that have been put forth that shows a mitigated effect of large CMEs and nuclear EMPs on the grid, because they don't want to be responsible and they don't want to go through the effort and raise electric rates to harden the electric grid. It's a big fight to prevent the hardening of the electric grid because they don't want federal oversight. They don't want the government involved in their actions. They don't want the government to designate the electric grid as a national security asset in this country. So they're fighting tooth and nail. So there's a lot of junk science floating out there, basically saying an EMP and solar flare is just not going to be that big a deal. Unfortunately, a lot of their engineers, and I've been in meetings with electric utility engineers, and they're waving these EPRI scientific documents, saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And so basically what's happening is there's practically zero chance of the utilities taking the needed action to prevent total devastation on the grid. And that's kind of where we're at. So the last point of this is a lot of you guys have these tracking apps. You're tracking the solar flares. You're tracking sometimes real time. And, hey, we know when it comes off the sun and we get the heads up and, we're getting this data. My opinion, okay, this is outside of the information I've given you, which is facts. This is just my personal opinion. I believe that data that comes from the satellite, okay, so we're going to know a G5 is about to hit Earth. This May 10th and 11th G5 that hit Earth that everybody was like very concerned about, myself included, turned into kind of a nothing burger. I mean, there were some adverse effects here and there, but for the most part, the first G5 that hit Earth didn't do a whole lot. Unfortunately, we're just entering the solar maximum. We're not even there yet. In the next 6 months, we're going to be in the strongest section of solar storms, and that's going to extend all the way for another year after that to the end of 2026. So there's going to be a lot, I shouldn't say a lot more, there's highly likely going to be more of these G5 and G5 plus CMEs that hit Earth. And this first one kind of being a big nothing burger, I think a lot of people are going to take that and they're just going to be like, oh, okay, so, this isn't quite as big of a deal as we thought. Problem is, if they get that data at the last minute, the last 10 to 40 minutes, I do not believe the NOAA is going to release that to the public. The NOAA is a government agency. I believe the National Security Council will tell them to withhold that information, at least for the 45 minutes or so until it hits, till they see what's actually happening, because they're just not going to want people to panic. They're not going to want people, crashing the cars, running out to the grocery store, looting, rioting, whatever else may come from it. So while NOAA is really good about trying to put real-time data out, and he even said this, they are really big, and his stance is, and this is from Sean Dahl at the Space Weather Prediction Center at the NOAA, he said, we want the American public to know, we want them to, understand what's happening. But I firmly believe that last bit of data is not going to reach us if it is the big one. If it's a normal G5, I think they'll continue to give us the data like they have. But if it's a big one, I don't think we're going to get that information. So this idea that you're going to have advanced warning to kind of bug out or get out before the thing hits, I don't believe that is accurate. I don't think there's any place you're going to get that information, myself included. So that is my stance on the CME's solar flares. We're looking at the next 12 to 18 months. We're going to probably be seeing a lot more solar flares, a lot more CMEs or coronal holes. There's a lot more things that are going to be happening with the sun amping up. And it's one of those things we're going to have to just kind of wait and play it out. Let me see if I missed any of my points here. One of the other questions I did ask him is about ham radios, and a lot of preppers rely on ham radio communication during a disaster. One thing you need to understand, and I know this is the case for a nuclear EMP that detonates above the atmosphere. Same thing with a solar flare. The amount of charged particles that are going to be floating around up there, your ham radio, your high frequency, it's probably not going to function, he said, for around 12 hours. So if you're relying on contacting loved ones or family members in different states and different cities using ham radio, that is probably not going to function anywhere, he said, between 8 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours. It's going to also be intermittent after that. So it could come and go depending on different factors and how that CME is reacting to the earth. So do not rely on ham radio if that is your only source of communication. Have a backup plan, basically a plan of action on how you're going to respond and how people are going to reach where they need to reach without relying on ham. All right, let me jump down here. We'll get some other questions. All right, so have you seen, so this is a Patreon. This is a question from a Patreon. So if you don't know, I'm on Patreon, Jonathan Hollerman. You can support me there. You can follow me. We put out a lot more PDFs and checklists and more videos, and we put a lot more information out there with our Patreon followers. So direct question from one of my Patreon followers. Have you seen, and can you share a good example of a written contract for a small group governance for a MAG after an SHTF event? A mini constitution to clearly define the agreement and governance structure of the group. For example, who makes what big decisions? Who or what group has final authority? Punishments for XYZ offenses to the group? How is someone expelled from the group, etc.? How to avoid mob rule, panic decision-making, and violence escalation under duress. Semper Fi, thank you for the question, Scott. So, yeah, this is important. All those points that he just mentioned, panic decision-making, mob rule, escalation of violence, how do you kick people out of the group, who makes decisions? I have these conversations with my clients, my clients where I'm building them a survival retreat, and individually. Here's the reason. There is significantly different types of MAG groups, in the sense of a lot of them, a lot of the guys I work with and a lot of the ladies I work with, they're family oriented groups. There's kinship, right? So a MAG constitution, we'll call it, is going to look significantly different in that instance than if it's like 3 or 4 buddies in some non-related people coming together that are making a survival group. So how you build that constitution. Then one thing I tell my clients, like, yeah, you may have just spent $4 or $5 million putting in all this infrastructure, thermal security, drones, tunnels, underground food storage, $200,000 worth of food. You may have paid for all this stuff, bought all the tractors, bought all the land. But at the end of the day, if you think you're going to sit up here like King Richard and rule your little group like with an iron scepter, you're going to end up in a ditch somewhere. I'm always telling them, like, you have to have some kind of organizational structure in your group, how you're going to set this up. Basically, at a low level, I would have people that are in charge, the people that are most knowledgeable in different areas, whether it be security, gardening, things like that, have like a head of each kind of department. And then I would have those heads kind of being on like a small committee, even if it's 3 or 4 people making decisions. You might have a quote unquote judge at your retreat, pick the most honorable, the most, a senior member, like somebody that's, an older person, more life experience, somebody with honor and integrity to act in like personal civil disagreements. So I would have some kind of committee. I just would really get away from the dictator style groups, because if things aren't going properly, and he talked about emotional decision making or panic decision making, mob rule. If you get a charismatic person that's very unhappy with how things at the survival retreat are going, and he starts meeting with people behind the scenes, think of the TV show Survivor, building coalitions, right? And he's a very emotional and charismatic individual that can basically build this group. And I mean, that can happen anyway, but he could basically, through mob rule, if it's just a open democracy where everybody gets a vote, including the teenagers and people that don't understand, or maybe there's someone that's elderly. So there's a lot of factors that you have to take into consideration. So my short answer is no. There's no like set mag constitution or contract that I have, because every single group I work with is different. Their in-group dynamics, familial or friends, or possibly even, hey, we need to bring somebody in that we don't have affiliation with, that they have this certain skill that we need in our group. We need an emergency room doctor, so on and so forth. So I don't have a set constitution, but all these things you should consider, and just make sure that when you set your rules for expulsion and all this other stuff, be careful. Be careful. If you expel a group, a person from your group, I was talking about that person that's building a coalition, trying to overthrow the leadership, doesn't like the way the survival retreat is being run, and you're like, well, we're going to kick that person out because they're causing too many problems. They've been warned, and it's just it's getting problematic. You kick that person out, they may end up finding another group. They may end up putting together another group in the outside world and coming back and taking all your stuff. So, and I've had other people that say, well, we're just going to shoot them. And, hey, I'm not going to say one way or another, but, there are problems for once somebody's in your group, letting them just go free. That person, because now they have no food. The only food on the earth that they know of is in your bunker, which they know where it is. They know the entrance. They probably know the secrets to get to it. So that's something else to consider. All right, let me go to the next question here from a Patreon follower. I'm fairly new to getting prepared officially and have really appreciated your perspective because it just makes sense. My family and I live on a dead-end private gravel road in a very rural part of Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. Based on my research, my plan is to focus on developing my skills and acquiring long-term food stores, rainy day foods that I recommended on the calorie spreadsheet. Just a side note on that, I still recommend Rainy Day Foods and Augason and foodassets.com. I think those are great places to buy food. But as food has gone through the roof, long-term food storage, and as food has gone through the roof here over the last 4 or 5 years, and I mean 50% increase. The one place where it hasn't is the LDS Ready Store. The LDS Mormon Church has a store essentially where you can buy cases of number 10 cans. That's 6 number 10 cans. And they've got wheat and rice and beans and pasta elbows, and they have dried strawberries and onions. And they've only got about 21 items on that website, but the 20 whatever it is items that they carry, they never raise their prices. It's crazy. Even the best sales I've seen on certain other food items on Amazon or on eBay or on other places still doesn't even come close to what the LDS Ready Store is charging price wise, and it's a flat rate shipping. I've actually ordered an entire pallet of food from them, and it's still $5 in shipping. I've had clients that have ordered multiple pallets of food. I have a client that has arranged an entire, truckload. I mean, like a shipping truckload of food from them. So a couple things to consider. You do not need a membership. When you go to checkout, when you go to purchase, it's going to ask for your LDS member number. You can bypass that. It's been a couple years I've ordered from them. I can't remember the exact process, but they do have a phone number there. And they're also limiting how many cases you can buy right now, but you can get around that too. If you call the number when you get your order together and just talk to somebody in the customer service, they're really good. They're really, really good about working with you. And you can tell them, hey, I just, I'm behind schedule, and 1 or 2 cases or 5 cases isn't going to cut it for me. I really need to get more. They'll make exceptions. And I've had, like I said, clients that have been successful in getting a large amount of food from them under exception. So use the number. You don't have to be a member of the Mormon Church in order to purchase food from them. Anyways, okay. I'm going to start the question over because I cut in there. Fairly new, blah, 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 blah. My family, okay, rural part of the Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina. My plan is to focus on developing my skills and acquiring long-term food stores. My budget will allow me to have a 1-year calorie for my family by the end of 2024. My question is around what skills to develop first. I am not law enforcement or former military. Gardening, canning seems to be the most important and probably makes the most sense for me. And my wife and I are also working on defensive firearm training. Any other recommendations for skills to develop? Thank you. Bingo. Number one. So when we talk about the threats in a long-term grid down event or in a long societal collapse event, it's always the same two for me. Food and other people are your 2 biggest threats of dying in a long-term grid down collapse. So if you can afford to store up 2 or 3 years of long-term food for every member that's going to be at your group, including people that you don't anticipate showing up, do that first, right? If that's outside the cards, and like this gentleman, you can only get 1 year's worth of food and you're going to rely on growing your own food, you better get really stinking good at not just growing your own food, but learning how to store it long term, learning about root cellaring, learning about proper ways of canning and hot water bathing and all these other things like that. So make sure that you guys are focusing on the ability to feed yourselves. And the other one is, I mentioned, so food and people. So defensive firearm tactics. Again, a lot of people will buy the latest and greatest weapons and ammo and all that equipment, and they never get professional tactical training on that equipment. That is really key, and that is really critical. The other thing I would say to focus on are force multipliers like suppression, thermal optics for your rifles. Those have come down a long way. I got the opportunity when I was in Texas here recently to do a hog hunt with thermal. I mean, I've worked with thermal scopes and stuff before in the past, just target wise and shooting wise, but being able to, I think I got 15 hogs that first night. It was a lot of fun. It was crazy fun. So if you've never been hog hunting in Texas, put it on your bucket list. It's a heck of a lot of fun. But so, I mean, there's certain things that are force multipliers that will make your small group or your defensive tactics even better. Next question. Okay. Hey, Jonathan, love your content. I've read both survival theories. It's really made me rethink how I'm approaching the next 10 to 20 years as I'm in my late 20s. Phenomenal reads, specifically about bug out vehicles. Do you recommend building a fully EMP proof bug out vehicle or just building a massive Faraday cage like this one? He provides a link to protect your existing bug out vehicles. Appreciate your comments and thank you for your work. First of all, if you haven't seen it, I do have a hour-long instructional video on EMP proof bug out vehicles on YouTube. It's free. So I would point you there first to get some information, but to discuss his actual link. So he shared with me the Mission Darkness. It's essentially a plastic carport. I'm trying to think of it, like a very small carport that you can drive your vehicle in. And then there is EMP, or I should say RF fabric that drapes over top. And then you make sure, if you're on a concrete surface, that it drapes completely over top the concrete and you have, complete seal all the way around. Couple issues. One, if this is your daily driver, number one, there's 50% of the day or 30% of the day, it's just not going to be in that Faraday bag, essentially, right? So that's your first problem. Two, that Faraday cage fabric, Mission Darkness, they've only had that tested up to 50 kilovolts per meter of E1 per what I can see. Okay, so we've talked a lot about EMP and the information that's available for EMP testing from a civilian side standpoint. They only have a certain amount of information on how to test products, and they're not up to the latest super EMP type information, which is highly classified, that the average civilian is never going to get access to, or the average civilian company is not going to have access to. So that Faraday cage, depending on where you're at, if you're in Maine and it's one nuclear EMP that gets detonated over Oklahoma, you're probably okay. You're far enough away from the central detonation. Let's say you're in New Hampshire, or I should have said New Hampshire, right? Somewhere up in there. Maine's pretty far away. Let's say you're in New Hampshire, and instead of Oklahoma, you get 3 hits, one in New York City, or 4 hits, like 4 EMPs go off at one time. New York City, DC, LA, and Seattle. Okay. Now you're right next to New York City. You're going to get a lot bigger hit of E1 and E3 when it comes down to it. So there is no guarantee. People always ask me about EMP protection, and I've got other videos that explain how to be 100% sure to protect your equipment. But if you're doing any of these other methods, nesting, buying the ESD, the disaster prepared bags that you put stuff in, there's a whole trash can thing, but that I got a video on that too, which is just kind of ridiculous. But like if you start nesting and doing multiple layers to protect your equipment, just make sure it's not something that your life depends on. So if your bug out location is 7 or 8 hours away and you're relying on that vehicle getting you there, I highly recommend that you have a purely mechanical drivetrain and you have an actual EMP proof bug out vehicle. So will that mitigate some EMP, that Mission Darkness Faraday fabric that gets draped over your car? It will probably help. I would not trust my life to it. That's all there is to it. Let's see here. Next question. Hi, Jonathan. Well, I'm not going to answer that one. Sorry. There's a couple questions here from Patreon followers or Patreon supporters. If I didn't answer your question here, I'm going to reach out to you directly. Some of them are things I just don't want to discuss over the air here. So last question from the Patreon followers is, would love to know just how much of a CME EMP my solar panels can take. So again, on Patreon, I've got some older videos that have discussed CME and EMP effects on solar generation at your house or at your retreat. In short, it's absolutely going to affect it. There's only one company out there, and that's Solark, SOL-ARK, Solark, that has actually had their equipment sent through an EMP generator. And they have, when you buy a Solark system for your house, and they are state of the art. I mean, they have some of the best technology and some of the best equipment out there. So it's not like you're buying some like backwoods company that's making solar panels. I mean, this is a top tier company with some of the best equipment. And what they have done is they've taken, the inverter, the charge controller, they've taken all the equipment that you typically, if you're looking at a solar system at somebody's house, there's just all this stuff that's mounted on the wall, right? They've taken that all and put it in a steel box and had that steel box tested at an EMP generation facility. So, but again, that's only going to get you 50 kilovolts per meter, to my understanding. 100 kilovolts per meter E3, but that's not the big issue. That's the lines coming in. So they have ferrites that they put on the lines. In short, no one's ever, or anywhere that I've seen published, taken and rented, one of the big facilities at, $20,000, $25,000 a pop, and taken a solar panel system and tested the entire thing. There are ways to mitigate the hit, but if we're talking mainly nuclear EMP. There's ways to mitigate things and give you a better chance of riding through, but there's no guarantee. Okay, so again, that's important because there's a lot of people on YouTube that are going to come out and say, "Oh, this is how you protect against nuclear EMP. This will save your stuff," and they have clickbait headlines, and they have no clue what they're talking about. They don't know what they just don't have access to the information. They need to have access to be saying the things that they're saying or putting out the information they're putting out. So as far as CME, a solar flare, that's not going to have the E1 component, which is going to affect microchips directly, silicon microchips. The E3 that's produced by the CME is going to attach to long wires, long line transmission lines. Your biggest threat is that coming into your system from outside. So a critical aspect for this, like anybody that does a survival retreat with me, you need to have a switch. You cannot be grid tied. Let's put it that way. If you have a large solar panel system and you're grid tied, you're drastically increasing the risks that your system is going to get fried in a CME. If you're not tied to the grid, you have a much, much, much higher chance of that system surviving. So with that said, this is the one area. EMP Shield is a company that, follow me on Patreon. I've said a lot of things about that company. This is the one area where that is a good system, is because it will prevent a lot of that E3 from traveling down the long line and the distribution network and the long line transmission lines into your house. It stops it at the panel. So that is one good application for that product that I do support. Aside from some of the other things that they advertise for. Okay, so let me jump to some of the comments up here. Curious on what your thoughts are with the speed of decline based on the Trump verdict. I hinted at this a little bit at the beginning of the conversation. I hate getting into politics on the political side of it. Personally, I think it's lawfare. I think it's kind of a travesty. I do believe technically Trump broke the law, but what they did with the court system, the 34 felonies, that's insane. Nobody, I know that there's people that have done the same thing he's done. Thousands of people, probably hundreds of people a year, do NDAs and pay things under the same thing with some of the other stuff that he's been tried on. I mean, this is stuff that's just common that happens in the business world. You know, I think it's a travesty, to be honest with you, what happened. So I don't know, man. I will see if he gets house arrest, if he gets put in jail for a short time. Here's my take. Regardless of what happens, whether Trump wins, Biden wins, from the conservative side of it, from the good guy side of it, be careful. Before January 6th, the day before January 6th, I posted and I said, don't go. Don't go. I said it's a bad idea. And then during January 6th, for all the insurrection and all the craziness that they've put onto that event, I was shell-shocked. You know, we're playing into the left's hands. A lot of this stuff is they're just trolling the right. They're just literally setting us up. So when we overreact, they pounce. They pounce and like, oh, these are the evil people that we were talking about. And look at the violence. Look at the this and the that. We're literally playing into their hands. So, you know, you hear the term, you know, the tree of liberty, and I'm not going to say the whole phrase, you know, how it gets watered and, you know, going back to breaking from England. And, you know, you hear people talking about Texas seceding and all these other things. It's a different day and age today. We're outnumbered. So back then, I think a majority of the people were in favor of seceding from England. I don't think the majority of the American city people that live in cities today, they're not rural. They don't have, they're not going to be on board with Texas seceding. You know, there's a lot of these different secession movements. I know Western Maryland's trying to secede, and Eastern Oregon, and, you know, they're trying to join Idaho, and there's all these different movements. I don't anticipate them coming to fruition. My stance is, my personal opinion, I think it's going to get worse and worse and worse. I'm not sure that, you know, some Michigan militias are going to be able to overthrow the government and put in and put Trump in. I don't buy into this whole overthrow the government from the right. I don't think it's going to happen in this day and age. It's not like Patriots where you can go and you can run and hide out in the swamp somewhere and, you know, run your guerrilla warfare tactics. We're talking about advanced satellite drones. You know, they can fire a rocket through your front door. They can track every electronic signal. They're going to know exactly where you're at, what you're doing, what you're putting together. They're recording everything we're saying and doing. I don't think your chance of winning I know there's a new movie out called Civil War. I just don't have a lot of faith that that's going to happen. You know, I think if a civil war did break out, you know, for whatever reason, I sat here and said I wasn't going to get political, didn't I? And here I am rambling on. Just be careful. Be careful what you're saying online. Be careful the circles you're running in. It's easy to get fired up. I'm as upset as the next guy as to the stuff that's happening politically, but your options are limited. In my opinion, states' rights is going to give you the longest lifestyle of freedom. So I think in the next 4 to 8 years, we're going to get, you know, what do we have? I think it's up to 11 million illegal immigrants just in the last couple of years since Biden's been in office. I think the left wing is going to try and get voting rights for them. And insanely, the Republicans are getting on board with that too. The Republicans always think, oh, we can get some of them. If we join in here, they're going to like us, you know. But it's the Democrat Party and the left that buys votes with a bunch of free stuff, right? The Republicans are never going to compete with that. Just like with this, you know, paying off student loan debt from the left. That's just buying votes this November. That's all it is. So we're not going to be able to compete, and I think they're going to get citizenship. I think they're going to get voting rights. And I think when you take 30, 40, who knows what the number is, illegal immigrants, and the majority of them vote Democrat, vote left. I don't think Republicans are going to win national elections just about anywhere. I don't think they're going to get nominated for dog catcher in a lot of these blue states. My opinion, leave the blue states, head to a deep red state. Texas is almost purple at this point, especially if illegal immigrants get the right to vote. That will become a blue state. So a lot of people are talking about Texas. My personal opinion, West Virginia, on the East Coast, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, possibly Alabama. Oklahoma is a great one. Idaho, South Dakota, North Dakota, who wants to live there? But even like states like or Wyoming would be a good one. But even states like Montana, there's a lot of left-leaning, like green people that live there now, and that's turning purple too. So find a place and find an area where there's going to be a sheriff and there's going to be state governments that are going to push back against federal overreach. That's my opinion. Now, I realize everybody has jobs. A lot of people have to live in a big city to whatever their career field is, whatever maybe they have a company there that's been there for 30 years. That's up to you. Like I said, I'm not telling you what to do, but I think states' rights in the future is the direction that you're going to have to move to a state that's going to push back against the federal overreach in the next 5-10 years. I think it's going to be as soon as the next 5 or 10 years. So let's take a look here. Let's look. Somebody asked about Russia. Okay. Escalating situation with Russia and China. My stance from the day Russia invaded Ukraine has always been, I am not tracking what's happening inside Ukraine. I am tracking what kind of attacks are happening in Russia. That's always been my stance. Here's what's happening. Russia's playing a long game. Russia has always been willing to sacrifice some eggs to make an omelet. They have thrown human bodies at the enemy in every war, and it is what it is. The problem is Ukraine's running out of bodies. They're running out of men to fill the trenches, to refill the trenches. Let's put it that way. So Russia is playing a long game. Ukraine is asking for more and more advanced weapons from the U.S. and from Europe to defend themselves. My personal opinion, I think the number one person that you need to follow on this topic is David Pyne. That's Pyne, David Pyne. He has a Substack. He's a national security strategist. I've done some interviews with him. If you just scroll down on my page over at the EMP Task Force page, he's got a lot of background. There's a lot more. I don't want to get in depth here, but there's a lot more going on in that situation than what the media tell you. There's a lot more going on with why that war even started than what the media is telling you. That's probably obvious to most people that follow me, right? So we're fighting a war with Russia, and I'm talking the United States and Europe. We're fighting with Russia, and we're using Ukrainian men to fight our war. And it's nothing more than a geopolitical way to bring Russia down and make them expend a lot of capital and manpower. It's to hurt them, to bring them down a notch, bring them down a peg. It has not worked like we would have liked. All the SWIFT and all the other things we did to try and isolate them did not work. All we did is push them into the arms of China and Iran and Saudi Arabia, and they're making deals with Turkey. And, especially their partnership with China, and they're doing joint military drills. They're sharing military technology. All we did, we're literally forcing the Axis and allied powers. We're watching them being formed today. So my concern going forward, Zelensky's getting pushed into a corner. He is. He's running out of men to put on the front lines. Putin's just biding his time. He's just biding. They're just throwing bodies at the problem, and they've got a lot more bodies than Ukraine does. So that was a long way of saying where I'm looking going forward is if and I'm going to say when Zelensky gets pushed far enough in the corner, he starts using these weapons that we've been giving him and starts attacking inside Moscow, or I'm sorry, inside Russia. When he starts using our weapons, so one of the things when we give him all this weaponry is that it's only to be used in Ukraine. We have forbidden them from using it against Russia in Russia. They start using some of these more advanced weapons inside Russia, blowing up cities, blowing up electric grids, blowing up infrastructure in Russia. Russia will blame us, right? Putin's been kind of just, for as evil of a guy as Putin is, he's been pretty stinking patient with the West. He's been really patient with us with all the interference that we're doing into that conflict. So, if things starts happening in Russia, that's when I'm going to start puckering up a little bit and seeing what's happening. China, Taiwan, just a real brief statement on that situation. Really watching the election, okay? If Trump looks like he's going to win, or if he wins the nomination in November before he comes to power in January, I would not be surprised to see China try and take Taiwan in those couple months, like starting in those couple months. China is going to want to enter that conflict with somebody like Biden in office, not Trump. So that's I'm not saying it's a definite case. I'm not saying definitely if Trump wins, China's going to attack Taiwan, but I definitely think that's a lot more likely to happen than not. If Biden looks like he won the election and he's going to be getting in January 6th, I think China is still going to take a little bit more time. They're still setting that whole scenario up. They will take Taiwan at some point, but I think that will give them a little bit more time and cushion. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. Again, if you don't know, follow me here on YouTube at Jonathan Hollerman. You can follow me at Instagram and Twitter at Griddown Prepper, on Facebook at Jonathan Hollerman, and the big one is on Patreon at Jonathan Hollerman. Again, we put a lot more content out there. We interact a lot more with people there. That's a way you can support me and support our mission. We're trying to get the grid hardened. So I'll leave you with, as always, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, let God do the rest. Have a great weekend, everyone.